Welcome to this Farm Advisory Service update. This video looks at the key messages from the Soil Nutrient Network farms. Some of the key messages from the Soil Nutrient Network have been on sampling. You can't manage what you don't measure. By taking a sample of soils and having them analysed, you know how to improve upon them. Same goes for your silage and other forage. By having these things analysed and sampled, we can look and see where we can make improvements to the farm. If you look after your soils will look after you.
We're here at Aucheneck, Campbell, and what's going on at Aucheneck, where we're located, and what are the challenges farming in this part of the world?
Well, I don't know if it's so much a challenge as accepting the reality of life. Where we lie 8 miles north of Glasgow, not quite at Loch Lomond. We enjoy, I suppose, something in the region of in excess of 60 inches of rainfall. But the rain means that we can grow grass. And the rain means we've got a lovely green countryside and a lot going for it. So for me, it is about keeping livestock because that's my first love.
And are you taking 2 cuts of silage typically a year, or would you be taking 3 or 1?
Well, that's one of these things about adapting and adjusting. I have done 3 cuts in the past where I was looking for higher quality to feed all the young stock that was going for sale. This year, got a little bit worried about the lack of grass and how it was starting to shoot and flower. So we certainly took some of it early. I suspect, looking at the silage pit, we could be a bit short. So that one might well end up being a 3 cut, but other fields will only be 2 cut. And we would normally go for 2 cuts. But the bulk this year certainly isn't in the first cut.
And your silage making process, obviously everything is weather dependent, but mowing to wilting, time taking, forage ragging, can you explain your typical process?
Well, we're now getting better at mowing because we've got better machinery. We can go a bit harder. The big plus to that is it's allowing us to start later in the morning before we mow, and that hopefully when the sun is up and the sugar levels are up. So that's giving us a better silage. We'll just leave it where it is for 24 hours. If the next day is particularly sunny, you don't let the rake get too far in front of the chopper because then it gets over dry. If it's a cloudy day and you've got a bit of breeze as opposed to sunlight, then get the rake well in front of the chopper. So again, you're adapting and adjusting to every day as it comes. And
when things are in the pit, are you adding any additives to your soil?
We don't use any additives. We do have an additional tractor in the pit, and the pit is being rolled as well as being filled. So we're doing our best to get a tight compaction in the pit.
So Campbell, you've got this fine aerator behind you. Why did you purchase this, and what benefit have you seen on your farm?
Well, 10 years ago I certainly wouldn't have considered it. Whether with wetter climate, whether with soil being more moist, I decided to try the aerator, and it's given me 2 major pluses, if not 3. One, it's opening up ground, and in dry weather, it will shatter ground, which helps drainage. It's giving aeration, which is helping growth. So we've got major pluses in there. This particular machine, as opposed to a slitter, it will not bring up as much soil, and you don't get wee tufts tugged all over the place. So it leaves a clean job. And it's also doing an element of rolling as well.
What is the key take-home message you have from the 3 meetings we had at the Soil Nutrient Network?
Oh, soil structure, soil fertility. I think now, without any debate, if your pHs are wrong, you're wasting your time trying to do a lot of other things. So you've got to get that right. And I think in the past, we probably didn't test soil enough. We certainly were liming enough, but then we lost the lime contractor because he chucked it, and we got out of the habit. And if we look backwards when we're into serious rotational farming and we grew turnips, we were using slag. You can't get that. So there's a lot of things just happen by the rotation. A couple of factors crept into play. Can I afford grassland machinery and arable machinery? And the answer is I can't. So I've become an all grassland farmer. We've increased our livestock numbers. So we've had to increase our grass acreage to make silage. And suddenly we've arrived at the point where we're taking silage off fields that are suitable, and the ones that we're grazing are realistically ones that you can't readily go in and take silage from. And that lack of rotation has got us out of a habit of testing soil and checking soil and keeping the pHs right.
What is your liming policy?
We've got a lime spreader to do our own spreading because in the spring, the contractors are that busy with the arable men, and we can spread our own. It allows us to go out when it suits us. What we're trying to do at the moment is go around as much acreage as possible with a ton and a quarter. We can go back and top that up later, but I think we've got to make a start someplace. So I want to spread as much ground and give it a tickle, and we'll see about topping up later.
From what you've learned from the soil nutrient network and your experience, what would be your kind of top tips that you would say to other farmers, whether new entrants are established, in terms of improving their soils?
Test your soil and get it right. It might take time. You can't do anything in a hurry. There are maximum quantities of lime that you can spread it on any one time. Make sure you understand when you can spread slurry and when you can spread lime in relationship to it, because there's a bad interaction in there. So you have to think about that. If you've got the acreage, you're better spreading on some of your grazing land and not over slurring your silage fields, because some of our fields are now a bit high in, what was it you tested? Phosphate, yeah. So we're a bit high in phosphate and we can afford to back off slurry in some of the silage ground. I tried splitting my fertilizer application by putting some on early and then using straight nitrogen a fortnight later. I'm not convinced that is necessarily a benefit. If you're going into a field, you start the tractor up once, you do the whole lot, as opposed to start the tractor twice. We've arrived at a point where fuel consumption and diesel costs are such, you've just got to think about how often you're doing things with machinery.
Yeah. And on that side of things, one way you've been reducing compaction, if you could just elaborate on, you've got multiple field entries and exits, you've addressed machinery sizes. Can you just elaborate on why you make these decisions?
Well, realistically, to justify large tractors, you need the work to do it. So there is a point at which you're better working with a smaller tractor and a smaller trailer, and if need be, getting a neighbour in to help, or even hiring somebody in for the day. That's going to be a lot cheaper than buying a huge tractor, taking your depreciation and your running costs. So that needs to be thought about. How do you go about it? How much weight do you put in the ground? Soil compaction is a factor, and it's got to be treated seriously. If you look at tractors very carefully, the clever men will tell you you cannot get a lower ground pressure in your field than you can the pressure in your tractor tires. So if you pump a tractor tire up to 35 psi, you've got 35 psi in the ground before you start. So again, you need to look at these things and adjust. So
from making all these different management changes, have you seen a yield increase in your silage, for example?
Yeah, you're asking that in the wrong year, because this year we've had a particularly cold spell and it lasted a long time. If you looked at the leaves in the trees, I was seeing through trees that should have been covered with leaves for far too late in the year. So it's difficult to gauge this year. Certainly where we did some overseeding, there's no doubts that it was thicker. And we realized just how much of an improvement overseeding had done when we moved to the field next door that we hadn't overseeded. and all of a sudden you were up a couple of gears and you were covering the ground an awful lot quicker. So, overseeding's definitely got a factor.
And can you quickly describe how you overseeded? What process? Was it grazed down? Was it? How did you start? How did you go into it?
Well, basically, the overseeding, our technique for it is to heavily harrow a field, get as much earth showing as you can, then spread your grass. And what we did was we put slurry on top of that just to keep the grass in the ground. At the moment, that's worked for us. Whether we'll be able to do that, because will I keep slurry back to the end of second cut? But overseeding in the autumn, I like doing it in the autumn. You haven't got a high rate of growth in your existing grasses, so you've got less competition, and it's given the grass a chance. Where we've ploughed and seeded, in the first year, we will take it as a round bale silage, we'll cut it later, less tackle in the field, less weight in the field, and then we'll bring it back into the silage rotation.
For a new entrant farmer or a young farmer who's wanting to improve their grassland management, where do you think they're best to put their initial money they have in to say they've got a couple of fields? What should they be, in your eyes? What would be the first thing you would look to address?
Oh, no question, your soil. You have to farm the farm you're on. The curious thing about farming is you can move from one farm to another farm, but you cannot roll the farm up, put it in your pocket and take it with you. You've got to give up that land and move to the next bit of land. But ultimately, you're farming the land. So you've got to take the land probably more seriously than most of us have done in years gone past. It was just there and you just got on with it. But now, as is true of all businesses, you've got to be a manager, you've got to have professionalism. Gone are the days when you just own the farm to make money. Gone are the days when the farmer sits in the house and instructs others to do it. Most farmers now are having to go out the house and do a handstand. So it's a very much more serious business.
And on the grazing side of things, can you just briefly explain what the grazing system here at Aucheneck and when cattle are inside and when they're out? And
nowadays, we try to do all our calving indoors. It's easier to check cattle at night when you're in a shed. You've got a crate there. They've all to be tagged. We castrate within 3 days of birth. So we try to turn out, hopefully, somewhere around middle of April into May. Depends on the year. What we will do is we will graze a field. Try not to put cattle out to too much grass because you'd run into a stagger's risk, and then move them into another field and try and lift their condition for bulling. So we're looking to rest fields and graze fields. So we're using a rotation in pasture. There was a gay wet year with the cattle in the shed for 6 months and 2 weeks. That was that particular year. And that's the thing that with farming, it's the easiest job in the world, sitting at a desk on the 1st of January, a map rolled out in front of you and a diary beside you. The problem is the fields aren't flat and the good man up in the sky doesn't always give you a dry day when you think you're going to do it. So you've always got to just quietly adjust, adapt, not get beaten up because you can't do something. Waking up in the morning and think in terms of what you can do, not what you can't.
That's great. You summarised our last meeting and you said that if you look after your soils, the soils will look after you. Do you still stand by that?
Yes. You've got to farm the farm you're on. If you want to be an arable farmer, then you go east and you buy an arable farm. If you want to be a livestock farmer, you come west and you grow grass. This is ideal territory for cows and calves. It's not a good territory for finishing cattle. So you've got to play the hand the cards are dealt.